start the session. Great. Hello, everyone. I think we're still seeing people trickling in, but in the interest of time, we will make sure we get started. Welcome to the NSF Navigating the NNA Proposal Preparation and Marriage Review Process Workshop. My name is Irina Dolinskaya. I am one of the NNA working group members. I'm a program director at NSF in the engineering directorate. We have, today we'll have quite a number of other of my NSF colleagues from the NNA working group joining us, and we'll get a chance to have them introduce themselves towards the end of the first hour before we go into the breakout groups. But the first hour will be structured mainly. I have a presentation ready, and I'll go through the presentation. I definitely want to make it kind of a bit more, hopefully casual as you can make it in the Zoom world. My colleague Shoko will be here helping monitor the chat for any questions you might have as we go through the presentation. But again, keep in mind, so if you have questions related specific to what I'm talking about on that slide, please post them in chat, and hopefully Shoko will help me make sure I don't miss anything important. But also keep in mind that for the second hour of this session, you will have a chance to go to much smaller breakout rooms with at least one of the NSF program directors and other representatives from the working group to ask questions. So you can also feel free to kind of hold some of the more specific questions until then. So with that, let me begin. Again, I'll just say that I have a lot of information on the slides. I'm not going to go through every single thing on this slide. The slides will be posted and shared with the participants. It's going to be shared on the NNA Community Office website. And some of them are really meant to be more of a reference for you as you are working on the proposal preparation for the NNA or any other actually NSF program proposal submission. But some of the slides I really wanted to kind of give you a little bit more chance to talk and then also ask questions as we go along. So with that, let me go ahead and start. And I want to start by making sure I thank our phenomenal NNA Community Office. They are actually the ones who are organizing it. They are making everything happen behind the scene for this workshop today. And so we are really grateful for their support. And of course, everything else they provide for the NNA community beyond this workshop. But I am personally definitely very grateful for their help today. So with that said, let me kind of jump into the presentation outline. So the goal of this first hour and the goal of today's workshop is really help you a little bit better understand what happens to your proposal once it's submitted, once it comes to NSF, what actually happens to it, how it goes through the review process, how we decide what panel to put on recruiting reviewers, and once the panel comes together and the reviewers actually discuss it, then what are they looking for? And the goal of that if you better understand what happens to your proposal, that will help you make sure that you are better prepared to write a more convincing proposal, to write a more successful proposal that is hopefully does a better job of articulating convincingly that this is the winning proposal. This is what NSF should be funding. So we have a bit of a longer outline, but really the overall kind of what I'll go through today is kind of very quickly talk about what NSF actually does, what our mission is. I will spend a lot of time going through the marriage review process. I think understanding that really is critical to writing a successful proposal. And then I'll really focus a bit more of some of the myths about NSF funding, some of the like do's and don'ts, tips, and definitely talk about some of the NNA specific advice that I would that we have for you. So first, what is NSF? And again, if you come into NSF, the National Science Foundation for funding, it is very important to know what are actually strategic goals for NSF, because you want to make sure that your proposal is aligned with that. So there are two kind of main strategic goals for NSF. One is transforming the frontier of science and engineering, right? Advancing the current state of knowledge within science or engineering to really kind of progress the science. The second strategic goal, which is just as important, is to stimulate innovation and address societal needs through research and education. So there's two things here. One is So you're advancing your knowledge, you're discovering something new. That's the first. That's kind of what we'll talk about later is intellectual merit. But then the second part is like, so what? So how would this actually help the society? How would this actually help taxpayers who are paid for this research, right? Whose money we're shepherding through our foundation. So that's, and then an educational component is another very important part of NSF goal. And this is kind of where we go to kind of what NSF does. First, as I mentioned before, it really supports all fields of fundamental science and engineering. The medical sciences is really the only one that kind of NIH takes the primary role on. But the second goal, or the second kind of component of what NSF funds and does through its funding is really enabling, kind of educating the next generation of scientists and engineers and educating the workforce for our nation. And so one example I give, at least to the PIs, principal investigators, I will be using PI abbreviation here a lot. I say, okay, we often, a big part of our funding goes, let's say, to graduate students to do research. We know having graduate students to do research might not be the most efficient way to have discovery, but it's a very critical and important educational component, right, of actually having them being involved in that. And that's one of the reasons why NSF provides so much funding for graduate students, right? Because it's educating the next generation of researchers and engineers and scientists is just as important as the actual discovery that they will, create along the way. So now let me talk about the merit review process. So this is the slide that I easily spent 20 minutes talking about, but I think this is one of the most critical things to understand. I know all of you worked really hard on your proposal, you submitted to NSF, and to some of you, it might look like a black box that you just kind of wait and what happens. And so I really kind of wanted to take the time to go through this. And this is where, if, as I finish up this discussion, if you have any questions related to this, please feel free to post them in chat and then we'll try to answer them as well. So what happens to a proposal once they come in? Okay, so hopefully before submitting your proposal, you would have some communication with the program directors for NNA or other programs that you might be interested in submitting to really talk in. And this is not where you send them the full proposal and say, is this good? Are you going to fund it? We don't do that, right? That's what we're going to do the panel review, and we'll talk about in just a minute. But the conversation you can have as a program director in the beginning is to help you identify whether your proposed activities, proposed efforts are actually responsive to a specific program or responsive to solicitation. So I know on my timeline, it says -1 month. Strongly encourage it to be more than 1 month, actually, before when you start reaching out to the program directors to ask whether or not this is a responsive proposal. And I have a separate slide talks about kind of what things you might want to talk to the program director before submitting, and actually as well as after submission. So then you submit a proposal. So once proposals arrive to NSF, the first thing that we do is that it goes through kind of an extensive compliance process. So it checks, are you using the right font, number of write-up pages, do you have the right documents? So that a lot of it happens automatically already. Actually, with our newer submission systems, a lot of it actually happens even before you click that submit button. You get a lot of kind of errors. So this is where if your after sponsor research is telling you, no, you need to revise a document because your margins are slightly off, you pay attention to them. They're really doing a service, a huge service for you to help you make sure that it goes through the compliance process within NSF. Once the proposals, if they deem compliant, if they're not deemed compliant, they get returned without review back to you. If they are compliant, then we start looking at them more in depth as a program director, as a working group for NNA, and we look at how, basically what we're trying to do is that we're starting to put together the panel. So now, not every single proposal at NSF gets reviewed by a panel, but what I'm talking about here is the panel review process. For most of the programs that I'm involved in, that's kind of the most popular way of doing it. Definitely how NNA is reviewed pretty much almost all of our proposals. Okay, so they come into the panel, and so what we're happening is that we have, large number of proposals. They're not all necessarily going to end up in a single panel. So what we do is that we look at the proposal and we decide how do we want to cluster them into the groups And again, in general, the panel size could vary quite a lot. Currently, especially in the virtual panel world, the panel sizes vary somewhere, between, 10, 15, 20 proposals on a panel, depending if it's a 2-3 day panel. But this is kind of to give you a ballpark of idea how many proposals together will be on your one panel. Once the panel, and the way we divided the panels is, again, everybody does it differently, but what we're really looking for within NSF is, can we put it in a cluster such that we could have a nice representation, a set of reviewers who could evaluate all of these proposals within the panel. What that also means, remember I said, you'll have maybe 10, 15 other proposals grouped together. What that means is that we will be bringing panelists now, right? So for, let's say, a typical panel with 15 proposals, I might have, another 10 or 12 or maybe even 15 panelists coming in for that panel. Now, not every panelist is going to be reviewing every proposal on the panel, okay? We don't want to, rarely we ask panelists to review 15 proposals, right? But they might. And not every reviewer, every panelist is going to be the expert in the specific field of your proposal. So when you're writing the proposals, but at the same time, what happens, so let me actually backtrack. So what happens is that we have a group of proposals for a specific panel, let's say 15. We might recruit about 12 panelists or so. What we do is that we basically go out, it could be, and what we're looking for here, again, we're recruiting people who will be able to provide the expert opinion, not on a single proposal in this cluster, right? But they need to be able to provide an opinion, kind of expert opinion on a few proposals here, okay? So this is not like if you submit an academic paper for review in a journal where they're gonna hand select, let's say, 3 reviewers specific for that paper. Here, the reviewers will be a bit more broad, right? So that is something is important to think about when you're writing the proposal, because you want to think about who you're writing it for, who is going to be evaluating and assessing the novelty and the validity of your approaches and all of those kind of things. So we recruit the panelists. They might be other researchers in US, they don't have to be in US. There could be some practitioners. If we have a number of proposals that have, let's say, Indigenous involvement, we'll bring in definitely, expertise that has that. So we really kind of hand select people who we think will be providing important expertise here. And let's think about NNA. For NNA, you probably know by now, if we're really looking for proposals that are looking at the integration between the natural environment, the built environment, the social systems. So it's a fair thing to assume that we're going to be bringing in experts who can evaluate the natural environment, who will be able to evaluate the social systems, and who will be able to evaluate the built environment, as well as experts who are maybe doing some of the cross-disciplinary research and understand those challenges and things important there. If there's a co-production component, we'll bring in an expert who can talk about that aspect of it. So it is important to think about it, especially if you're used to writing proposals for a very specific discipline and submit it to a very disciplinary focused program, that here the panel, the reviewers will look quite differently than maybe you used to. And you do need to write a convincing argument of why the methods are appropriate for both social science, natural environment, and built environment, or whatever makes sense for your specific proposal. Okay. Once we recruit the panelists, we ask each panelist, usually review anywhere between 4 to 8 proposals. They get those proposals usually about a month before the panel date, and they read those proposals and submit written reviews before the panel day. Okay. So the reviews that you get back when your proposal either awarded or declined, those are the reviews that panelists, the reviewers, basically prepared before they come in for the panel. So then the panel day, and again, usually it's more than one day. It's often, I think most of the time it's a 2-day panel. It could be 3-day panel. It could be 1. And so once on the day of the panels, we come in, we see, all the reviewers show up. We look at the 15 or whatever proposals we have in that panel. And during the panel, one by one, we discuss, proposals, okay? So now the panelists who review that specific proposal will present their evaluation, but there are others in the room who might have not read the proposal, but definitely will have that specific proposal, but they will also have questions. They will also have, perspective and question, and discussions. So all panelists in most cases will participate in those discussions. Okay. So then at the end of the panel, kind of the panelists put them in the category of kind of how competitive in their perspective each proposal is. And we'll talk about what criteria they use on the next slide when they're actually deciding how competitive a specific proposal is. Okay, and those are very important things. Once the panel concurs, kind of concludes, then we as program directors, and then in a case as a working group, meet and discuss what funding recommendations we would like to make. Okay. If you get, if it's a strong proposal, we just decide to go with an award recommendation. We'll reach out to the PI and kind of start putting together all the internal documentation. Or if it's a client proposal, again, we usually, don't reach out to PIs until we kind of put all our documentation for the explanation and process that. Okay, and this usually takes about 6 months from the submission time, or at least NSF's goal is to get most of the proposals reviewed and processed within 6 months from submission. Okay, now it's been a long slide, not quite 15 minutes, like I promised. Any questions about this? I just wanted to take a moment, maybe take a breath myself. Okay, well, if anything comes up, you let me know. So I guess my important thing that I think is for takeaways from here is for you to start thinking about who will be reading your proposal, who will be reviewing your kind of evaluating your proposal, and who will be discussing your proposal. And the important things here is some of them might be the expert in one specific aspect of your proposal, but a lot of people who will be discussing are not the expert. So you need to be thinking about framing your proposal and making clear arguments within the proposal to that non-expert can appreciate the importance, the validity, the challenges of the questions that you are planning to tackle. So, all right, I'm seeing one question related to the previous slide that I think is a good one, so I can quickly answer before I move on. So the question is that what is the role of NSF managers during the panel discussion? So it does vary within a little bit between the different programs. I mean, different kind of program directors have a bit of a different way they run the panels. But I'll say in general, and definitely kind of applicable for NNA, is that during the panel, we guide the discussion, we make sure we finish on time kind of thing. We make sure that the panelists are discussing the review criteria that I will talk about right now, that are they're required to talk, to make sure they don't stay off topic, to make sure that they don't start introducing some implicit biases, that we work very hard to evaluate from the review process. But we're not sharing our personal opinion about whether we think a proposal is a strong proposal or should be funded or cited or things like that, right? So the panel's role within NSF review process are advisory. So they are, right, we cannot be experts in everything that gets submitted to NSF or everything submitted to NNA. So that's why we bring in the reviewers. So during the panel discussions, we guide the discussion a little bit. We might ask some clarifying questions, or maybe if the panel, for example, did not discuss a specific review criteria that is important, we might ask them, somebody comment on that? But we definitely do not in any way influence the decision or influence or even share our personal opinion of, in any way about the strength of the proposal, things like that. We're there to clarify if let's say reviewers are not sure about the review criteria and things like that, although we try to do a lot of that before the panel starts, but that's kind of the typical role within. And I think it's a typical for the whole foundation. So now, what are the review criteria? What are actually panelists allowed, and the only things they're allowed to discuss when they are talking about the proposal? So for NSF, for every single proposal that ever gets submitted to NSF, there are 2 review criteria: intellectual merit and broader impact. So these 2 apply to every single NSF proposal, okay? And these are very important. These are the terms that we use a lot: IM, intellectual merit, BI, broader impact. So we kind of use them on a daily basis, but it's important to understand what that means. And this relates to the initial goals for NSF that I talked in the very beginning. Intellectual merit is there going to be advancement in knowledge and understanding of whatever the field that they are tackling? Is there novelty? Okay. And then broader impact is, so what? Who cares? What is going to be the benefit of the work, of the proposed work, as well as the actual maybe other activities that are incorporated in the proposal? Okay. So those are the things that reviewers are asked to evaluate for every single NSF proposal. Now, what happens, and I'll dive into them in more in depth on the next slide. But one more thing I want to say, but then additional solicitations. So NNA is something called solicitation within NSF. What that means is that solicitation has additional requirements, additional kind of focus. They might have additional restrictions on who can apply, what topics they're looking for. So NNA is a solicitation. And just like many other solicitations within NSF, we have additional solicitation-specific review criteria. Okay? So if proposals get submitted to a solicitation, then in addition to intellectual merit and broader impact, the reviewers are also asked to evaluate and talk about solicitation-specific review criteria. So it is another very important thing to keep in mind. When you look, let's say, at NNA as a solicitation, go and the solicitation and find that section and look what those review criteria are. Because what's going to happen is that we're going to ask reviewers to comment on those. Make answers to those questions very evident and clear to the reviewers. Okay, so often this is one of the, I think, if you know, the tips that I would love to share with you is that look at their review criteria, especially solicitation-specific review criteria. Look at them and make sure your 15-page project description or some of the supplementary documents like data management plan or, you know, the management integration plan, whatever the other documents you're pulling in, make sure from there it's very easy for reviewer to answer those questions, because we are gonna require them to answer those questions. Okay. So now for each of these intellectual merit body impact, there are 5 review elements. Okay. And these are very important again to understand. You'll see it in every solicitation. These are standard NSF. It's in our proposal preparation and award PAPPG. Can never remember what it stands for, of our guide. But so this is kind of the standard NSF 5 elements for review, merit review. And very important to make sure that your proposal actually addresses those things, or comments on them, or making it clear for the reviewers what these are. So the first one is, what is the potential for the proposed activity to, if it's intellectual merit, to advance knowledge and understanding, okay, within the field, across the field. And for the broader impact, what is the proposed potential for the proposed activity to benefit society or advance desired societal outcomes, right? So again, go back to the NNA solicitation, look at the NNA goals, look at whether, let's say, the broader impact, right, or is answered those things, and how intellectual merit is actually advancing the knowledge there, okay? The second review element is, to what extent do proposed activities suggest and explore creative, original, and potentially transformative concepts, okay? So this new innovative advancements to, in question 1, are they creative? Are they original? Are they, are they exciting? Are they transformative? Okay. Third, is the plan to carry out the proposed activities well-reasoned, well-organized, and based on sound rationale? Okay. Does the plan incorporate mechanisms for assessment? So here, so before we set up the previous 2 kind of talk, okay, we have some innovation we're planning to do, it's creative. Do we have a good plan in place to actually accomplish those things? Okay. Now, it doesn't mean for NSF that you need to have like month by month, this is what I'm going to do. NSF funds high risk, high reward projects, right? If you know exactly for a 5-year project what you're going to do month by month, It's probably not research, right? This research, there's new discoveries. You cannot potentially know what you don't know yet or what you're going to discover year 3, but you should have a good plan, okay? And I think an assessment mechanism for assessing success is another one that I see PIs often overlook and kind of not really include in the proposal. And the reviewers are often asking for that and saying, how would you even know whether you're successful, right? Especially if you're looking at a longer project, 5-year project, you don't want to, might not want to wait until year 5, right, to find out whether you were successful or not. Maybe you want to have some assessments along the way. Think about what makes sense for your project, okay? But don't overlook the assessment. The 4th one, okay? And this is one of my favorites because this is one of the things that I want to kind of mention. One of the myths I mentioned later is that talking about kind of, oh, NSF only funds people who are already well established and I'm new to this field, so I don't have a chance. And the answer is absolutely not. And this is what it is. So the 4th review element is how well qualified the individual or the team or the institution to conduct the proposed activity. And this is the key here, all right? What we're really asking reviewers to assess is saying, if you're proposing to do a specific effort, are you qualified to do that effort? We don't care all your other qualifications if they are not really specific to this effort. You might have a Nobel Prize in economics, but if you're writing something or focused on an engineering contract proposal, that's completely irrelevant, okay? So you really, so I'm hoping, I remember being a junior PI submitting proposals and was, a little bit nervous about, do I really have a chance? But also I think now on this side as a program director in NSF, I take this very seriously because this is one of the things that helps us during the panel discussion. Remember that question, like what do program directors do or program officers do in the panel? We make sure that when they discuss the review elements and they say, oh, this person comes from this amazing lab, they'll say, wait, is this relevant to the proposed activity? How is this gonna show you qualifications, right? So, and this is also, I think, an important one to think about. The question that we often get is, how much preliminary work do I show you? What happens if I don't have a lot of, prior work published in this field? And the answer is really kind of think about how you can convincingly articulate to the reviewers that you are qualified to do this work. And there might be very many different ways of doing it. It might be an extensive preliminary section in your proposal because maybe you don't have as many publications there. It might be a simple reference to a few publications that you have there, right? Whatever that is, you just want to think about it. How do you convince the reviewers that you are qualified or your team or your institution is qualified to do this activity, okay? And then the last one is, are there adequate resources, okay, to the PI, either already existing in your institution or through collaborations or through requesting budget to carry out the proposed activities, okay? And again, you might have access to phenomenal facilities, but if they don't have anything to do with the proposed activity, it's irrelevant, okay? What you want to talk about, do you have adequate resources? And this is also where PIs often come and ask, I don't know how much to request for this. Like, do I ask budget for this? What do I budget? How many graduate students? What do I need this equipment? Can I budget for it? You really need to think about what resources you need to ask for to be successful. I've also seen PIs thinking that if they, it's like if they underbid, if they come lower, then it will be higher chance that they'll get funding. It's like, well, I really need $1 million, but I'm only going to ask for $500,000 because then it's small enough that I have higher chances of getting funded. The answer is actually absolutely that's not true, because if the reviewers are looking at the scope of your work and seeing they need $1 million to do this, and the team thinks they can do it in $500,000, they don't fully understand the scope of the work, right? They don't fully understand the complexity of the problem. So this is where it's important for you to really think and kind of along with this well-organized, well-reasoned plan to think about what are actually needed to do the proposed work. Okay. All right, I'm gonna pause for a minute, take a sip of water. I see that a couple of my colleagues posted, thank you so much for saving me and spelling out what PPPG stands for. Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. I was not too far off. That's good. Only 5 years at NSF. And Kendra also kindly shared the actual link to the latest document. This is a document that we update every year. This is a document where it spells out every little thing you might need to know and more about submitting proposals, as well as kind of once you get the award, how would you actually manage it, what you need to do. Any questions so far? This is so much harder to do in a Zoom world when I'm just staring at people's names. I appreciate a few of you having camera on it. This is some, human feedback. So with that, let me go to the next slide. So common myths about NSF funding. I already mentioned a few of them. We only fund scholars at elite institutions. Absolutely not. In fact, I would say if you look at the NNA major goals, we have 4 major goals. I'm not going to talk too much about NNA specific solicitation. We have a separate webinar about that that is also being recorded and posted. But I will point out that for NNA, for example, bringing a new research community, diverse research community is one of our goals. So we absolutely, actually, especially in NNA, are interested in bringing more researchers, more disciplines, more types of institutions, even individuals coming submitting proposals to NNA, because we truly believe that this is a very complex problem. You really need to have a diversity of perspectives coming to the table and actually exchanging information to come up with innovative, creative solutions to these challenges. We only fund famous academics. I already talked about that. I do know a colleague who's, declined, we've declined proposals from people who might be very famous all the time if it's not relevant to what you propose to do. The third one is important. Once declined, always declined. So it's a myth, right? So, and that's where I really would like to encourage you not to be discouraged by declination, okay? So if your proposal gets declined, one of the things you can do, and I have it reiterated on one of the future slides, is that you can absolutely ask to have a conversation with the program director who manages your award, the review process, to have a little bit more conversation to maybe help you interpret some of the review feedback from the panel, or even just kind of make sure you're understanding what's happening. And absolutely, just because you got declined, I think almost everyone who ever submitted stuff got declined at some point, okay? And we also make a whole lot of awards, okay? So it doesn't, definitely don't get discouraged just because you got declined. You can often, we work really hard to make sure that the review and the panel summary, so the panel summaries are summarizing the discussions that come in from that, remember the 2 or 3 day meeting where we discuss proposals. And often we add PO comments, program officers comments in your declination as well. So we're really, ultimately our goal is to fund exciting, innovative research. Not every proposal convincingly articulates what that is. And we absolutely believe it's important to help us communicate that information to you as the researchers to help you kind of figure out how you can revise and improve and make a better argument, convincing argument for why this is an exciting research. I mean, sometimes, reviewers might say, hey, this has already been done in this previous literature and you might have not known. In that case, maybe you shouldn't resubmit that proposal. But I guess what I'm saying is that don't get discouraged just because you got declined. A lot of declined proposals get revised and then, awarded on the next try. But definitely having conversations with program directors is very helpful. NSF is only using quantitative approaches? Absolutely not. And the kind of the fifth one, and again, especially for NNA, when you're looking at, we're asking you to work on this convergent research space, right? So you're going to be bringing different approaches, absolutely, and maybe merging them together. And so we absolutely welcome that. So the 5 is hopefully is clear as a myth as well of qualitative and quantitative approaches are mutually exclusive. That's not true. And definitely NSF proposals must have hypotheses. I'm an engineer, we don't do hypotheses, so definitely not the case. So let me talk a little bit more about some kind of things. So hopefully by now you have a bit of better idea of what the review process or what happens to your proposal. Now let's kind of reverse engineer or think about that. How can we now write a proposal that will do well during this review process, okay? And I really want to kind of emphasize on this, the blue box in the center kind of questions is that, so what reviewers are doing when they're reading your proposal, okay, what they're really looking for is they're trying to understand, what is your research about? Okay, what are the research objectives? How will you do it? Can you do it, right? And is it worth doing? So those sound like a pretty, straightforward questions, but you'll be surprised how many proposals we receive where this information is buried, to where reviewers are really struggling to see, or like the proposals actually does not clearly talk about, like, here's what we plan to do, here's how we are going to do it, okay? So think about that. That's what reviewers are looking for when they're looking at your proposal. And actually, I do want to, I skipped the first point, but I think it's actually very important. Hopefully by now you've gotten that message, is that think about who you're writing the proposal for, okay? You are not writing the proposal for us, the program directors, okay? We are not the experts in every single thing that gets submitted to a single program, okay? You are writing it for the reviewers, okay? And hopefully the first part of my presentation gave you a bit of an idea of who the reviewers might be, okay? So let me go. Here's kind of some other better steps. Honestly, I don't think I need to read through them. Again, we'll share the slides, and you can definitely look at them. So I'm gonna skip to, oh yeah, I have more. There's 12 of them. Know the review process. Okay, so I think, yeah, so a lot of them, unless you have any specific questions, I'm gonna go to the next one. Again, I always knew that I had more slides than I do. It's by design. It's gonna be hopefully a helpful resource. So now you're thinking of submitting a specific program. So the next thing you might want to do is actually get to know the program a little bit better, okay? So for example, you can go to the NNA program website. And this is kind of what a typical NSF program looks like for every program now, is, you have the synopsis on the top, okay? The other thing that you can do here for every program, unless it's a brand new program, you have this awards made through this program link, okay? And this is where you can actually go and see all the awards made by this program in the prior years, okay? And this might be helpful for you to get an idea of what kind of projects typically get funded there. Or especially if you think we've been funding something that might be similar to your approach, right? You might want to look at it. Want to make sure that you are citing the work by that team if this is something of relevance there. I do want to caution, I like to caution PIs by not reading too much into what has been previously published, okay? The important thing to keep in mind, we can only fund what gets submitted to us. So maybe there's no proposal on, let me do something very extreme, so it's clearly a hypothetical example, space exploration in the Arctic, okay? Maybe there's not. It doesn't mean we're not interested in that topic. It just means we didn't receive proposals on that topic that were fundable, okay? So it's a good idea just to get a general flavor of the type of work we fund, but please do not use it. Do not, saying that, oh, I don't see my topic, so they're not interested in my topic. And definitely don't say like, oh, they already funded one project on this topic, so they're not going to be interested in funding my topic. Okay, so don't do that. Don't read too much into what's been funded before. But it's also a good idea to see kind of what budgets, maybe, if that's something you want to look at, just, it is out there. So every award is public information within NSF. So the other important thing to keep in mind, as I've said, hopefully enough times by now, is that definitely contacting program directors in advance if you have any questions about budget, about the kind of the scope of your project, about the fit of your project. You can go and find program contacts on the website. For NNA, it's easy. It's NNA@nsf.gov. But for other programs, again, definitely kind of check that out. And then also on our website is we're going to be kind of constantly updating with any webinar recordings, including this webinar will be there hopefully shortly, right? So you can see there the slides for the presentations we post that on the website as well. So check that out as well. Okay. So, okay, this is maybe one of the kind of specific for NNA. So this is the slide. I kind of pulled things. So NNA right now just started 4th year in implementation. So we already had at least 3 years of full runs of reviews. So these are the ones that kind of the most common weaknesses or common kind of things that I've seen in the proposal. And if my colleagues want to add anything else here, they're definitely welcome, especially share with you in the breakout rooms. So the first thing that we really want to make sure is that, so on the right, you can see this NNA Venn diagram, right? So as we've mentioned, as you probably heard us talk about before at other venues, at the heart of NNA is this requirement of looking at the problems at the interconnection between the social systems, the natural environment, and the built environment, okay? So make sure in the proposal, you clearly articulate what are you looking at, okay? And then think about the fact that intellectual merit needs to be lying in there, right? So if you're looking at the intersection between social systems and natural environment, that's going to be your intellectual merit. So all of those 5 review key criteria, right? Do you have the right expertise on the team to do social science type of approach, right? And things like that. So make sure that your proposal clearly talks about what overlap you're doing. And you actually have to be advancing knowledge in that interconnection. Not just, oh, and I'm going to do outreach activity in a group, in local community, so that checks off social systems. So you need to be actually advancing knowledge. The intellectual merit of an NNA proposal needs to lie at the intersection of at least 2 of these, or 3, depending on what type of proposal you're putting together. Okay. The second one, and as well as at least one of those focus areas that you see around it, right? The 6 ones we have around. Then the second one, I guess I have talked about, is like the expertise and the methodology actually needs to be clearly correspond to those overlaps. And the third one that, again, we see so often, and I really want to make sure it's very clear to everyone submitting to NNA, is that if you're doing co-production of knowledge, which is encouraged, but absolutely not required for NNA because it's not appropriate for every project. But if you are doing co-production of knowledge, or if you're doing some outreach activities, that does not automatically checks off as a social system. Okay, if you're doing co-production of knowledge, that's a methodology of how to advance the knowledge, how to advance intellectual merit. You could be doing co-production of knowledge at the intersection of natural environment and built environment. Okay, so just because you have co-production, it doesn't automatically say that's the social systems research. Okay, it's just a methodology. And again, outreach activities is a broader impact, right? So if you're doing some outreach activities, that's great, absolutely. But that does not automatically says, oh, it counts as an intellectual merit in a social system. So those things that we see a lot of proposals not really clearly articulating, kind of how they advance social system intellectual merit. All right. Any questions? I'm actually doing pretty good on time, but I'm happy to, drop in a few questions if you have any, or if you're jogging them down for your breakout group, that's absolutely fine just as well. So let me pause so I can see if you have questions. Okay, all right. So some do's, have a strategic plan of what you plan to do. Build on your strengths. I think that one, especially when I often talk to more kind of junior PIs or kind of researchers who are new to write proposals, is that think about, and then they kind of trying to figure out a specific project, how would they frame it? And I say, well, think about what are your strengths, right? What can you convincingly argue that you are the right person to do this work? And really make sure you play it off and make sure that you make a connection between your proposing to do and what your strengths are there, your individual or on the team. Definitely differentiate this work from your and other sponsored work. So this is another common mistake that I see, not mistake, common weakness I see in the proposal, okay, is that often PIs spend a lot of time and effort within the proposal itself, the document, talking about the preliminary work, okay? So you might be talking about the preliminary work. And what I often see happens is that then they make the switch to what's proposed to do. And the switch is kind of not very explicit. So somebody, a reviewer reading, especially if they're one of those reviewers who are not like the expert in your specific subfield, when they read it, if the transition is too subtle between what you're proposing to do, what your preliminary work and what you're proposing to do, often reviewers by then are like, wait, so has it been done? Like, what is new here? Okay. Or the other extreme is that they'll just put their own reference. They're like, oh, this builds on this previous work, reference 7, and I do blah, 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 right? And then the reviewers, again, they're not going to necessarily go read your reference 7. You need to clearly articulate what is so fundamentally different between that reference 7 of your own work and what you're proposing to do. So don't underestimate the importance of talking about those things. And I think as very much relates to the next one is performing a thorough literature search and kind of exploratory research before writing the proposal. Again, here, if you are submitting to kind of the incubator grants within an NNA that are actually funding you to do some of this maybe potential exploratory research, there we would not expect as much of that, right? But kind of think what's appropriate there. Don't rush, obvious. Don't wait until last minute, which means 1 month to contact the program directors, okay? Honestly, as you can imagine, we get a lot of correspondence 1 month before, but also what happens is that any feedback we give you just 1 month before is you're not going to be really able to meaningfully integrate it into your proposal. Don't make proposals too broad or too narrow. I mean, easier said than done, right? But think about the scope, right? Think about what you can accomplish within the proposed work, right? And in NNA, again, we have like the upper limit of the duration, but you can make it anywhere in between. So it's really kind of for you to decide what is the appropriate scope for that. I already talked about not about asking too much or too little money, especially. That is not your advantage. And here's the PAPPG guide comes in: proposal and award policies and procedures guide. A couple more kind of just things, and this is what I've mentioned quite a number of them already before. So before submission, it's okay to talk to the program directors or program officers. Those two terms, used interchangeably for the most part within NSF. You can talk about kind of overall objectives of the program. That's why we do these webinars and record to be able to communicate that with broad audience. You can ask about some kind of general budget activities. You can ask about whether your project is responsive to specific program. You can definitely volunteer to serve on a review panel. This is one of the best way to learn about NSF review process, is actually being one of the reviewers, okay? You don't have to have an NSF award to be a reviewer, for example, okay? So it's really, remember, we are looking at the expertise to review a specific kind of a set of proposals. That's what we're looking for. And the way you volunteer to be a review panel, just email the program directors or like at NNA, NSF.gov, maybe include your CV, include a few keywords of a short paragraph of your expertise, and we'll put you in a kind of add to our pool. Keep in mind, don't get discouraged when you don't get invited right away. We have a number of conflicts of interest rules that we have to follow. For example, if you have a proposal pending in a specific competition, like NNA this year, for the most likely, you're not actually allowed to be one of the reviewers for the same program, okay? Or there's institutional conflicts of interest. So there's a lot of things we try to balance when we do that. So don't take it personally when you don't get asked to be in the panel right away. And Kendra is posting some very helpful information specific to that. Thank you, Kendra. So the things that you should do, if the program director says that the proposal is not a fit to the program, there's really no value arguing with them. You might want to instead think about like why, right? Did I not clearly articulate something? Did I not make a convincing argument that there are actually that there's two systems interconnection between them or whatever that is? So just ask yourself why instead rather than arguing. Definitely do not try to convince us to fund it before submitting the proposal, okay? Like I said, you're writing for the reviewers who's going to go to the panel It's going to go again. It's going to get reviewed. So there's, I mean, I've had people come up, especially the pre-pandemic, when they meet with us and they bring you open, laptop and start giving you the slides and trying to be like, that's all great. Like, that is not your best time with me is spent to discuss how you can write a stronger proposal to convince a panel of experts that this is a great proposal. And definitely don't count on anything remembering us talking. Like, don't come back a year later. Oh, remember we had this chat? We talked to a lot of people. Some of us have better memory than others. If your proposal does get declined, you are absolutely welcome to ask for feedback on the panel discussions. You can kind of talk to the program director about potential revisions, volunteer to serve on the panel. Don't get mad. I mean, you can get mad before you contact the program director. I've been declined. I remember the feeling. So, that's okay. Go through your 7 stages of grief or whatever it is, but then, come back and talk to us when you're kind of ready to have a constructive discussion. Definitely don't insult program directors or reviewers. I mean, common sense, but not everybody has it. Or don't try to convince us to change our mind. Okay. So so what's next? I think we've talked about this already. Again, kind of think about, one thing that I think I maybe not quite mention, but I want to explicitly talk about is that if you think you want to kind of contact program director to see if your specific ideas are responsive to the solicitation or the specific program, put together one-pager kind of project summary, white paper we call them. And that's a good thing to send to an NNA, NSF.gov in case of our program, or if you apply to other programs, program directors. Again, just to kind of get some feedback on its responsiveness to the program. Then the other thing, kind of, the NSF proposal kind of reviewer, I've talked about that. And again, don't hesitate to ask. We're happy to ask. I mean, sometimes you get maybe overwhelmed by the correspondence specific time, or it might be a busy panel date time for us, but we're always here to help. We want to help. If you reached out to us and you haven't heard in a couple of weeks, it's also okay to send a follow-up if that's, if you think sometimes it kind of, we didn't respond quickly enough. I think with that, I will see if we have any other questions before we go into the breakout rooms. I think I have a couple minutes. Kendra, do you want to jump in? Please do.
Yeah, I think a couple people were curious. You've mentioned that the slides will be posted and the recording will be made available in the future. A couple of people were just wondering where to follow up. And it could be that the community office, follows up with the registered participants. But if you had a quick answer to that now, maybe people would like to hear that.
That's excellent. Jenna, do you want to jump in and share? I think NNA community office definitely intends to post it.
Yes, absolutely. We plan on posting the presentation and the slides to our website in the near future.
Do you have any timeline? I think some people are a little bit more.
I don't. I'm hoping I can probably get that done within the next week.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I think the recording might take just a bit more to. So in fact, I think we can stop the recording now, and I'll go through the details a little bit of the breakout rooms. The breakout rooms will not be recorded. So if we want to stop